Hi, welcome to The Simple Solution.
Today we will be reviewing significant digits.
Significant digits consist of whole numbers 1 through 9. Zeros must follow 3 rules.
There are 3 rules when it comes to zeros. The first one is for leading zeros, the second is for trailing zeros, and the third is for trapped zeros.
Starting with leading zeros are never significant. For example, the 3 leading zeros are not significant, and even with a decimal, those 3 zeros are not significant. A little rule is leading zeros are still not significant with or without decimals. Remember.
Next we have trailing zeros, which are the zeros at the end of a number. They are only significant when a decimal is present in the value. For example, this number has no decimal, so the trailing zeros are not significant. They do not count. In this case, we do have a decimal in the number, so the zeros at the end are significant, and we cross out the first zero because leading zeros are never significant.
Next, we have trapped zeros. Trapped zeros hold a place value. So for this example, there's 3 significant digits because the 0 is trapped between 2 whole numbers. For the next example, all 10 numbers are significant because the zeros are trapped between 2 whole numbers.
Now, it's your turn. To find the zeros, you're going to have 5 different examples here. And you want to try them on your own. Make sure that you pause the video to work on them, and the explanations and answers will be next.
Example number 1. 3 steps that you should follow is you need to find your zeros, identify the placement of the zeros, and the third one is search for all decimals. Here we found the zeros and the decimals for the example. Because there's a decimal, the zeros do count. If there was no decimals, then they wouldn't count and it would be trailing. So because there's a decimal, there's 4 significant digits.
Moving on to example number 2. So you want to keep the steps in mind. Number 1 is identify the zeros. Number 2 is look at the placement of the zeros. And number 3 is to identify your decimals. We did that here. So because there is a decimal, the zeros at the end count, which means that there are 5 significant digits in a case of trailing zeros.
Example 3. Keeping the steps in mind, we had to identify the placements of the zeros, identify if there's a decimal. Because there's 3 zeros in the beginning, it's still going to be leading zeros, so leading zeros never count. We cross those 3 zeros out. Then because there's a decimal, the last 0 after the 4 does count, but if there wasn't a decimal, it wouldn't. And because there's zeros trapped between the 4 and the 7, those are trapped zeros. That's why we have 5 significant digits and all 3 rules apply.
Now on to number 4. So we're going to identify the zeros and their placement, and there is no decimal in this number. It's important to note that there are no leading zeros because there are no zeros in front of the 2. There's also no trapped zeros as the zeros are not in between whole numbers. And because there is no decimal, the trailing zeros at the end are not significant, which means that we have 2 significant digits and trailing zeros.
Example number 5. So the first thing we're going to have to do is find the placement of all the zeros. Because there's no decimal, we have no trailing. Well, we have trailing, so we have to cross out the last 5 zeros because there's not a decimal. And we have a leading 0, so we have to cross that out too. And then the 0 between the 8 and the 4 is trapped between 2 whole numbers, so we have 4 significant digits, and all 3 rules apply.
Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more videos.